possible. Ooh, it, it is. I'm gonna have to give her her own theme song. So let's say it together. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, the source of all life, who leads us to green pastures and deep wells when we engage ourselves in Torah study. That is not a translation, but rather where I want to be. Welcome, Stephen. I am so excited that I just can't hide it. I don't have it queued up. I'm sorry. I'm so excited that I just can't hide it. That tonight we're going to be beginning a series of classes that are not going to be week after week after week, but like special events in which my friend, our friend, Marc Kronisch, wave to the crowd, Mark. Anybody here from Chicago? And I will be teaching on Tefillah that we use on Shabbos morning. Why the Shabbos morning Tefillah? Because that's where we meet together. And my desire is that each of us picks up something along the way, or more than one thing, that we can enter into when we are davening that tefillah, or when we're singing Adom Olam, as is the case that we do every Shabbos morning, to the melody of Ripple. But as you well know, that is not the only melody that there is for Adom Olam, much to your surprise, I'm sure. And so I would like to begin by screen sharing the text with you to Adom Olam. And let's sing the most traditional of all the Adom Olam melodies, the one that I grew up with, the one that many of you grew up with, the one that you rarely hear anymore anywhere that you go. And I need a volunteer who will read the English after each line. So if somebody raise your hand, Deborah. Okay. So I'm going to screen share in a moment. Deborah, unmute yourself, please. Great. Note that I have chosen a traditional melody and a traditional translation. I changed one or two things, but I kept the gender to he because that's the way it appears in the Silverman, and that's my most deepest, the Silverman Siddur, and that's my deepest connection. Mark, you're laughing in recognition, right? By the way, yeah, he married my in-laws, Renee's parents, the Silverman, the editor of that Siddur. Hi, Dan, welcome. So I apologize in a way for keeping with the gendered language, but as always, there is method to my madness, with the emphasis on the word madness, of course. All right, so here we go. You ready, Deborah? So after every line, if you would please translate. Adon Olam Asher Malach B'terem Kol Yitzir Nivra.
Master of the universe, who reigned before any creature was created.
Liet na'asa v'cheftso kol azai melech shemo nikra.
At the time when all was made by his will, then was his name proclaimed king.
V'yacharei kichlot hakol levado yimlach nora.
And after all things shall cease to be, the awesome one will reign alone.
V'hu haya v'hu hoveh v'hu yiyeh b'tifara.
He was, he is, and he shall be in glory.
V'hu echad v'yein sheni lehamshilo lehachbira.
He is one, and there is no second to compare to him, to associate.
Beli reshit, beli tachlit, velo ha'oz ve'hamishra.
Without beginning, without end, power and dominion are his.
Vehu eli v'chai goali, v'tzur chevli b'yet tzara.
He is my God and my ever-living Redeemer, the rock of my destiny on the day of distress.
Vehu nisi humanos li, menat kosi biyom ekra.
He is my flag and my refuge. He is the portion of my cup on the day I call.
Be'ado afkidruchi, b'yet ishan ve'ar'ia.
Into his hand I entrust my spirit, both when I sleep and when I awaken.
V'yimruchi geviati, Adonai li v'lo ira.
And when my spirit, my body too, Adonai is with me, I shall not fear.
What are the themes? What are the themes in Adom Olam? Pick out some things that leap out at you of the themes of this piyut. Now, when I say piyut, this is not a prayer. It doesn't begin with Baruch Ata Havaya, Baruch Ata Adonai. It's a piyut, which is a liturgical poem. We're not quite sure when and by whom it was written. Some say it was written in the 11th century by Solomon ibn Gabriel. Others ascribe it to someone else. Others ascribe it to other people. That's possible. It dates even hundreds and hundreds of years before the 11th century. But regardless of who wrote it, there are some things that we can pull out here. And so unmute yourself. And if someone could just, well, I'll do that. If someone unmute yourself and offer a theme that you see, and I'm going to leave this up here just for a moment or two, that leaps out at you. What is going on here? You don't have to raise your hand. Just unmute yourself and call out.
God is eternal. He, first of all, was, is, and will be, always will be.
Okay, so you not only gave us your sense of it, but what the proof text is. God is eternal, v'hu haya, v'hu hoveh, v'hu yeh, right? So God was, is, and will be. Thank you. Somebody else, Judy.
God is an anchor.
Where do you get that from?
Into his hand I entrust my spirit.
Terrific. Thank you. So this is your giving up yourself to something that is going to hold you, anchor you, someone else. And by the way, if I can't see, if you want to raise your hand, do it virtually, and then you'll pop to the top of my screen.
That he's in your spirit both nocturnally and when you're awake.
Ah. So it's both day and night, but when sleeping and when you're awake. Okay. Was that Stephen?
Yeah.
Thank you, Stephen. More.
There's only one.
Only one. Where do you get that?
V'hu echad ve'en sheni.
Okay. There's who echad like Shema Yisrael, Onai echad, right? And there's nothing next to, right, alongside. There's no second. There's only an echadness. There's no sheni. There's no anybody else?
Source of everything, sustainer of everything.
Who is that?
Bina.
Thank you, Bina. Source of anything, everything. And what's the proof text?
Right at the beginning.
Who reigned before there was...
B'terem kol yitzer nivra.
So before anything was, there was only. So you, if my sense is that you are extrapolating from there. If all there was God, then everything came from that source, from that center, from that kernel, from that isness, from that centermost point. Somebody else was going to say something?
It's just it's always been there and always will be there. I mean, it's timeless and all powerful.
Timeless. Is that Jay?
Yeah.
Thank you. And where do you get the all powerful from?
Without beginning, without end, power and dominion are his.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Terrific. Now what I'd like to do is go through the text and pick out a couple of words to deepen our... Oh, Dan, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry I was late with this. But what I notice is that there's nothing here about covenant. There's nothing in here about a responsibility of mankind to do anything in order to get this. It just is. I don't know whether that's important or not.
No, I think it's very important. From what I'm sensing, you're saying is that this is a statement of creed. This is a statement of understanding who Yud He Vav He is to us, and our relationship with, and our understanding of, as experienced in our lives. So it's a document of theology, in other words. So thank you, Dan. So it might explain why we say Adom Olam when we say Adom Olam. Now, to hold on to that question, because we're going to get there. And just to give you a heads up, Marc Kronisch is on deck. And I hope, Mark, you're not going to hit me in the head for covering territory that you, but I'm being, great. All right, Adom Olam, what does it mean? Anybody? What's the translation here?
Master of the universe.
Master of the universe. All right, so that's a common understanding. So what I'd like to do, though, with a couple of words, we're going to just look behind the curtain. And so look more deeply at what a few of these words mean. Adom Olam, Master of the universe. Olam can also mean what?
World.
World. That's right. Master of the world. Olam shares the same root of the word ne'elam. Ne'elam is hiddenness, that which you can't see. So perhaps we can understand this as the master of all that we can see and can't see. All right? Adom Olam, Asher Malach. What does Malach, when we say Asher Malach, it's the word Melech, right? Which means king. We don't necessarily vibrate with that word anymore, right? But here it is in the piyut that we sing every Shabbos morning together. So Malach being past tense, that God reigned, and then we'll soon get into God was, is, and will be, right? Next line, Le'et nasa v'chefetzo kol, at a time when all was made by God's will. This word chefetz, at this time that all was made, this word chefetz can mean will, but what does will mean? You might have an understanding of it. I like to see this as through God's yearning, through God's chefetz, God's desire. God's desire for what? To be in relationship with other than God. If all there is God, God's lonely. God needs us. God needs to bring other into existence. Alrighty? So at this time, now it's interesting, it said la'et at the time, but this is at a time that was out of time. So this can actually make your head spin if you start to think about it, about the theology and the what's going into this actual piece. Alrighty. We already covered v'hu haya v'hu hoveh. By the way, v'hu yeh b'tifara, there's the word tifara, tiferet. I used to belong to a congregation, Tiferet Israel. So if you hear the word Tiferet, it means glory, right? V'hu echad v'yein sheni, l'ham she'lo l'hachbira. Right? So it says here, there's none to compare, right? There's only who's on first. There's no other. There's no other part of the Abbott and Costello that's playing itself out here. There's only who is on first. L'ham she'lo l'hachbira, and this is an example. Like a mashal is like a story that we tell or an example of something. So this is an example that God is l'hachbira, to be. It says to associate with, to be connected with, or to be linked to. So l'hachbira, you see the word chaver in there, right? Chaver meaning your friend, and that's our relationship with our friends. We're linked to our friend. We are connected to our friend. Next, 2 lines later, v'hu eli v'chai goali. Notice that what's happening with the grammar, v'hu eli v'chai goali v'tzur chev li. This is becoming even more, and this is becoming now personal. Right? Up until now, it's a statement of theology, a statement of our relationship with this divinity. But here now, it is flipping over, and I just want to make sure with my time. It's flipping over to a personal statement. V'hu eli, this is my God, El. V'chai goali, and it's the life of, or the ever-living Redeemer. The Goel is a Redeemer, but not just any Redeemer, but my Redeemer. V'tzur chevli, it's the rock of my, they translate it as destiny, but you're going to see what I'm going to do in a second. B'eit tzara, at the time I got tsuris, right? Tzara, tzarot, there's distress, there's rough things happening. Now listen to this. V'tzur chevli b'eit tzara. God is the rock to whom I throw a rope out to. In Hebrew, the word chevel is a rope. And so I call out in my distress with a rope, and I'm either pulling in to, or divinity's pulling me towards. But until I do that, until I call out, the calling out is my rope that I'm throwing out. So I love the idea of that. There's a connection that is caused by the a rope that is available to us at all times. Alrighty. V'hu nisi umanos li, manat kosi b'yom ekra. Manat kosi is a portion of my cup on the day that I call, and that's where it comes in. Of having to call. That's also alluded to in Psalm 145. V'yikru'u ve'emet. The line ends with, and I shall call out with all of my emet, from everything from Aleph to Taf, all every part of me. Right? B'yado afkid ruchi b'eit ishan v'ayira. So this is what Jay was just alluding to. It's both the God that is present in my life and that my spirit lives within day and night, sleep and awake. And now we're coming in for the landing. V'im ruchi gaviyati, right? And with my spirit and my body, right? Adonai li, Yud He Vav He li. This is not just my God, but this God is with me or within me, and I have no reason to fear. Velo ira. Note 2 things as far as language is concerned. There are 2 places in here that I see that Adom Olam is parallel to Psalm 23. Adonai roi velo aksar. That God is my shepherd, and from what do I lack? Where are those 2 places? The first place is V'im ruchi gaviyati, Adonai li velo ira, is parallel, and that's in Adom Olam, is parallel to Gam ki elech begetzal mavet. Though I walk through the valley of deepest darkness, lo irara ki ata imadi. I will fear no harm because you are with me. It is a recurring theme from Psalm 23, and you know that Solomon ibn Gabriel knew his entire Tanakh by heart, right? And he most probably drew from that psalm in the creating of this piyut. Alrighty.
And Rabbi Mark, he was also a mystic.
What a beautiful segue time moment. Thank you, Mark, for jumping in with that. So I'd like to lead us gently into your teaching, Mark. You're part of this, where it's a tag team tonight, by pointing out several things that you all have said. Dan, you very acutely pointed out there's no covenant, no responsibility here. And that's absolutely true. It's just a statement. In a way, it's a statement of faith, right? The beginning part talks about God, and the second part talks to God in a personal manner. Note that if you are familiar with Psalm 145, Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha, it bounces back and forth every line between talking about God and talking to God. All right? And that is a recurring motif in a lot of our liturgy. So just bookmark that and note in the Hebrew or English whenever you are in prayer, when you're talking about and talking to, and whether or not there is an energetic difference in those moments, and how the talking to might bend your lens a little bit towards a deeper relationship with whatever your God is to you. Biado afkidruchi, bieti shan v'ya'ira, v'yimruchi geviati, Adonai li velo ira. Good Shabbos, everyone. We'll meet everybody at the Oneg following.
I think that's the segue, huh? So, first of all, I want to thank Rabbi Mark and really thank all of you for really welcoming me into this community. I was really looking for a Jewish renewal community that really spoke to me, especially in the davening, and I use that word on purpose. Tefillah, Reb Zalman would say there's a difference between praying and davening, which incorporates the body, the mind, the spirit, all of it. I am very rooted in Jewish renewal, and I think in order to really understand where I'm coming from in my teaching, and this is a wonderful opportunity, I really thank you for this opportunity. But for you to understand where I'm coming from, I'd like to give a little bit about my spiritual journey, my personal spiritual journey. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about Jewish renewal and what prayer in general in Jewish renewal really means. From Reb Zalman's teachings. And then what I'd like to do is start to unpack a little bit of the mystical tradition of Adom Olam. Rabbi Mark there's so much overlap that he's already alluded to some of the concepts. But what I want to do is I want to take three of the lines in particular and unpack them and show how that relates to Kabbalah and the Jewish mystical tradition. And then I want to share an awesome teaching from Rabbi Laura Kaplan, who has a wonderful teaching, which you will see about Adom Olam. So I hope I have enough time to do all that, but I'll squeeze it in. I want to give a brief, short crib note version of my path, which incidentally starts in a Jewish congregation, and a conservative congregation in Bridgeport, Connecticut, which, to no surprise, that was the melody for our Adon Olam every Shabbos, the Silverman Adon Olam. And when I start to unpack Adon Olam, I'm going to use some of the translation from Silverman, but I'm also going to incorporate some other beautiful English translations in. And I have to say, as you'll hear in a moment, I'm not that steeped in the Hebrew language, unfortunately. That's a real source of angst in my life. It's such a beautiful, rich language. So I took some of the translations from the Birnbaum Siddur, from Marcia Prager's translation, a wonderful translation from the Bethel and Sudbury Siddur, which is a wonderful Siddur, and actually a few others. So I grew up in conservative, and to make it really short, oh yeah, that's Rabbi Lawrence Kushner's shul, yeah. And I ran away from it. It just didn't speak to me. It wasn't fulfilling. It didn't fulfill my inner spiritual needs. I ran away. I went to the Eastern religions. Some of my story is going to sound very familiar to a lot of people because I've heard this story over and over again from a lot of my contemporaries. I went away to the yogis. I linked up with the Sufis and started leading universal worship services. I went to interfaith gatherings. And in 1979, at the age of 24, I went to an ecumenical service, or it was a retreat, at the Satchidananda Ashram, then in Pomfret, Connecticut. It was called Yogaville. It has since moved to Virginia, but it continues. Anyway, Satchidananda was there, and he was there presenting along with Zen Master Son Sen, complete with his stick to hit people on the knuckles with, Brother David, a Benedictine monk, and this guy I never heard of, Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi. May his memory be a blessing. That night changed my life forever. And in the middle of the drumming and the yoga, Reb Zalman starts doing Kabbalah Shabbat, and I was blown away. I had never heard these prayers that I knew from childhood in such richness and so relatable, especially when they got to Michael Row Your Boat Ashore and he's hallelujah. I couldn't believe what I was experiencing. I immediately became a chassid of Reb Zalman, and I followed him everywhere. I went to the Fellowship Farm Retreat Center, which is before Eilat Chaim and before any of that stuff. I joined, it was called then B'nai Or, Sons of Light. Before it was Pnei Or, Faces of Light. I started my own Chavarah, which became Pnei Or of Connecticut. I became a lay rabbi and was leading Friday nights and Shabbat morning services. I linked up with Arthur Waskow in his Sukkot Shalom program, which was the Jewish renewal's response to ending or prevention of a nuclear holocaust. And I started doing Sukkot Shalom ceremonies. I started doing Jewish men's work, which eventually became an organization called Mensch Work. And I was in my 20s. I was very young. I was, at that time, the only book on the shelf in men's was Robert Bly, and the women had shelves of books. And the men, we were way behind, but we caught up, I think. Um, Anyway, I got involved with Panayor on the national level, and Panayor became the organization of the Jewish renewal communities, which then morphed into Aleph, combining with Arthur Waskow and the Shalom Center. Um, let's see. Now, at the same time, simultaneously, I started going to things called New Age Judaism. This is different than Jewish renewal. And there were many different teachers. I was going to these retreats, and I met Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach, and I became a chassid. Believe it or not, I don't know how it's possible, but I became a two Rebbe chassid. Anyway, I learned Shlomo Carlebach. May his memory be blessed. I will say that he did not get a chance to ask forgiveness for some things in his life, and I think that's was difficult for the Jewish renewal communities. And but Shlomo was also an unbelievable teacher, and I learned a lot from Shlomo. And at the same time, I was learning from. I even went to his moshav in Israel, Moshav Modin, which incidentally were a bunch of American Jewish hippies. They had the first granola factory in Israel. That was their claim to fame. And I learned from David Din, Rabbi David Din, may his memory be blessed, who was a Bratzlovian, a follower of the Baal Shem Tov, or Rabbi Nachman of Bratzlav. Learned a lot from Reb David. And Meir Fund, who was an Orthodox rabbi in Brooklyn. And so I studied and I learned. And then I went to the first Panayor Kala, which was a gathering of the Jewish renewal folks. And at that time, we were still B'nai Or. In fact, the next Kala, I was in Reb Zalman's class when a person raised their hand and said to the group, "Why are we B'nai Or?" And this was a man, and he proposed Pnei Or. By the following year, B'nai Or became Pnei Or. Reb Zalman listened. It was a thing. I was very pleased, and everybody was. And at that time, Jewish feminism was really, really up and that's when we started changing the Hebrew and powerful Shekhinah energy at that time. Anyways, at one of the Kalas in 1992, I was in my early 30s, and I went to Reb Zalman's class on what he called the Spiritual Eldering Project, which became the underpinnings of his book, From Aging to Saging. And so, and then I also joined the Panayor Sidur project, which we wanted to put a Sidur, and actually it was produced in loose leaf form, so it couldn't get freeze dried like a Sidur was. We could change it. We could take out from a loose leaf notebook. We could put in. And I was published. I did a section on the morning blessings to movement. So I was published in the Panayor Sidur. I had a feeling that maybe I should go for smicha with Reb Zalman. My contemporaries at the time, now listen to this list, my contemporaries in the classes were Tirza Firestone, Gila Razel, Marcia Prager, David Zaslow, Shefa Gold, Sheila Weinberg, and a whole bunch of others. I know a lot of Jewish renewal rabbis. And I have to say, as you'll see in a moment, that's a source of inner challenge for me, and some shame that I never went that far. Um, as Reb Zalman said, I'd have to break the Sefer barrier, and Hebrew was really difficult for me. The Hebrew language, my brain wasn't wired for languages, and had a real hard time with it. And that was before a lot of things were then available in English and so on. So that became a roadblock. I'm just going to shorten it and say I had an incredible spiritual crisis that consisted of a health crisis, a divorce. I became a single dad, and I floundered for many years. And then I met the love of my life, Hillary Stern, in 2005 over the internet. That's another whole story in itself. Someday I'll share that. And health issues forced me to retire early after 36 years of elementary school teaching. I taught little kids how to run around and have fun and bring joy into their lives. And in those years, I strove for balance and mind, body, and spirit. I never gave up. And I was very gratitude. I had a second chance of life in the physical. I'll say I had 4 back surgeries and chronic Lyme disease that almost took my life. And so when I literally say I got a new life, I got a new life. And I have lots of gratitude. Now, anyway, I had an epiphany when I retired from my teaching that I had a lot of wisdom and experience, and I wanted to share it. So I joined an organization called Yerusha, the Reb Zalman Legacy Program. And I joined an organization called Saging International. All this was about aging the saging. And so I took a review with Reb Bahira and Shaya and Rabbis Victor and Nadia Gross. At the same time, I started studying Buddhist or Jewish Buddhist meditation with Jeff Roth, who I already knew for 36 years. And Yerusha also dealt with Davanology, which is prayer. I'll say Jewish renewal style prayer. And we've often heard Rabbi Marc and others mention that we're a laboratory for experimental prayer. And that's really what Jewish renewal is, or parts of Jewish renewal. Anyways, the other parts of it are eco-kosher, which is environmentalism, and deep ecumenism, which is interfaith kinds of work. And at the same time, I joined the NAACP and did that kind of work. I facilitated Earth Day interfaith services because of climate change and what was going on in the world. And then I tried to set up an independent study to get smicha, but Reb Zalman had died, and I tried to set it up an independent study with 10 of his smicha rabbis that I knew, and it didn't work. And then the pandemic hit, and I had a third epiphany. Who can spend the time going for a smicha when the world needs us now? And so I went looking for, when the pandemic, a community that I could relate to and daven with. And one of my teachers, Reb Nadia, suggested I contact Mark Novak, and I did. And the rest is history. Here I am. And I'm currently studying Kabbalistic Jewish meditation with Shlomo Carlebach's brother-in-law, Reb Yoel Glick in Jerusalem via Zoom. So this is where I come to you from. And so when I talk about Adom Olam or any other prayer, this is the backdrop that I really wanted to share with this group. And so let me just say that Reb Zalman has this to say about Jewish prayer, and this is what has led me to unpacking Adom Olam this evening. He says, the use of the Siddur has come highly misunderstood. The problem goes back to the 19th century and its overemphasis on rationality. Many Jews at the time saw the Siddur as a book of information, but the prayer book and the prayers are a guide for offering the heart's feeling to God. To understand how this is possible, you have to see the Siddur in a whole different way. It's like a coloring book with outlines. People have to fill in the life, the background with context. And so Jewish renewal is based in the Kabbalistic teachings of Reb Zalman. Everything goes through the lens of the four worlds. And I'm making a lot of assumptions here that we understand some of this language. Some I'm going to define, and some I'm just going to leave in the air because the Marx brothers are going to continue this series, and so we'll unpack a bunch of it as we go along. So let's start unpacking, and I want to talk about some of the white spaces between the black letters. That goes for Torah, which is what we're doing tonight, as well as the prayers or anything else. I forget what Rabbi Mark called this. Not a prayer, whatever the word was. But anyway,
Piyut.
Piyut. So I used a bunch of translations. So I want to say first that Kabbalah is a code, in a sense. It's a code for experiential connecting to the divine. So Torah then doesn't just become stories and allegory and metaphor and drash. It's sort of, as Reb Zalman would put things into computer language, we have to press the right buttons to get the right sequence for it to download and upload and make sense to us. So, Adom Olam, let me look at the line, Biyado avki ruchi, biyet ishan v'ya'ira. My soul I give into God's care, asleep, awake, God is near. Birnbaum says, to God I entrust my spirit when I sleep and when I wake. Now, this is why I wanted, Reb Mark wanted to start with Modeh Ani. Modeh Ani says, thank you, God, for returning my soul when I wake. This Adom Olam says, thank you, God, for protecting and looking over my soul when I go to sleep. So I just had an aha. I said, I don't want to start with the waking up. I want to do Adom Olam and talk about the soul going. Where does the soul go when we go to sleep exactly? Well, here's where Kabbalah has a little bit of an answer. Now, where does it go? Well, I'm going to tell you, but not until next week when we unpack Modeh Ani. So you have to come to the next class when the Marx brothers unpack Modeh Ani. Now, back to Adom Olam. Okay, so God is going to protect the soul when we go to sleep. All right. Where do I want to go with that? I'm going to leave that hanging, okay? Except, spoiler alert, Kabbalah teaches that there are 5 levels of the soul that go from our nefesh, to our complete immersion in God's light. From the finite nefesh to the infinite God, to the infinite divine. That sounds impossible. Most Jewish teaching says, there's 3 levels of the soul. We have a nefesh, we have a ruach, we have a neshama. But Kabbalah teaches something a little bit deeper. So spoiler alert, we're going to unpack some of the levels of the soul through Modeh Ani, next class. Onward. Liet Nasa v'chefsot kol. God created by divine will. Rabbi Mark talked a little bit about will. And I love Marsha Prager's translation. When your desire brought all human, when your desire brought all into being. But the best translation I found was Bethel Sudbury. When you willed the world into life. Now, Kabbalah talks about how God created. The creation story is very central. And by the way, the teachings I'm rendering over are from Rabbi Isaac Luria, the Ari, who was in Svat in I believe, the 16th century. So a lot of the cosmology that I'm learning and teaching is from the perspective of the Ari. One of these days we'll go through the whole creation story and how does that relate to us human beings and our purpose in life. But Kabbalists talk about how God created. And the problem is, how do we get from God's infinite light to this finite world? Now, if you remember the story in Torah about Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, he couldn't look at God's face. He would have disintegrated. He had to look at God's back because the power of this divine light, and this is a mystery. The God, if anything, is a mystery. So we're gonna create more questions than we do answers. But God's light is such a powerful energy that in order to even create or to be in a finite world, that power has to be filtered. And how did God filter it? He created these various energy centers to filtration through 4 distinct worlds of existence. Now, these energy centers we call Sefirot. And the matrix of this filtration system we call Eitz Chaim, the tree of life. And so God's energy comes down through these Sefirot, through this energy system, which the Sefirot are really the attributes of what we are describing as some adjectives of God's attributes, until finally we come down. So let me just say that it starts with very abstract. I'm just going to mention this in some words, but I'm not going to go too much detail. God contracted God's self, called Tzimtzum, and somehow was able to bring this energy down. I'm going to leave that there. But we call this energy Ein Sof, infinite light, nothingness, allness, beforeness. afterness, present, past, future, all in one. So we talk about the world of emanation, a world of spirit, that we call Atzilut. And in our davening on Shabbos, we get there in the Amidah. And then the light gets filtered down through the world of creation. We call that Bariyah. It comes down even further filtered to the world of formation, Yitzirah. And finally, we wind up in the world of Asiya, a finite world of matter. So God's will is his will is what
Channeled?
no, what's the word you used for will before? I want to use that again. Do you remember?
It's yearning, God's yearning.
Yearning. Thank you. That's it. So God's yearning then became an idea, emanation, and then the emanation became a blueprint for creation. That is coming down to Bariyah. The blueprint became construction phase. That's Yetzirah. And finally, it became what we call the making, or actually the thing itself. This. So it's filtered down all the way from God's will, to which God's will is infinite, to here and now, which is finite. That is hard to understand. And by the way,
can I jump in for a second?
Please.
So I want to share how I play with this and how I understand visually and image-wise,
Please. Yeah.
how this will folds into and emanates into existence. So the will, that the moment, even when you use words are so lacking here, because you say moment, all this is happening out of time, right? But in the moment that this yearning arises in the divine, it's kind of like when we get an aha. It's that initial spark that there is something that we grok, that we get, that we want to do, but we have no idea what it is yet. That aha moment that occurs at the highest level then filters down, it channels into the world of thought. It's an idea, and this is the world of Bria. This is where we get an idea for something. Okay, now I know what I want to do. Next, and remember, these worlds are not, they're not vertical. They all are interacting with each other at the same time. Then into the world of Yetzirah, which is the world of formation. So that is the world in which, if you think of pouring cement into a mold, something into a mold, right? The idea, it goes into the mold, and then you have like the blueprint. Then you have the actual way in which your idea became, with your initial impulse became idea, and now it's getting there. It's getting there to being in reality. But then you have to put it into practice. You have to create something. It has to become something in the world of Asiya. And then you have something you can touch, something that you can play with, something you can actually mold. So that's my kind of like the way. And I see it almost as an inverted funnel, Mark. That if you think of a funnel, how it's inverted, you have the smallest, narrowest end by Atzilut, the narrowest end at the Godhead. And then it kind of funnels out into a wider space until finally we have here at the very bottom the world that we live in. What do you say about that? Does that work for you?
Thank you. What I say is that parallel, both of what we just presented was in the mind, was thoughts, wonderful. a reminder that Kabbalah is experiential. You got to get it in the kishkas. That takes some real unpacking. So, thank you for what you shared, Rabbi Mark. Um, I think we could get 5 more rabbis to give another version, and we then might start understanding it. It's really some.
Okay, so I have to interrupt you there because you told us before that you never got smicha. So how about 5 more rebbes, of which there are several in this room?
Okay, gotcha.
And we all can
Well, Reb Zalman always said that, we all have a Rebbe within.
That's right. We can all step into that role at any time.
Yeah. So I really want to leave some time for this, for Rabbi Kaplan's teaching. It's kind of like a meditation, but it's going to bring some of this home on a little bit different level. But one more quick thing. We've already talked about V'hu haya, V'hu hoveh, V'hu yeh b'tifara, and what Adon Olam means. I just want to remind us that we're talking about God didn't create the world, past tense. God is creating the world now. It's a verb. God is a verb. God is godding as we speak. If God wasn't godding, we wouldn't exist. So we have to really think that God is isness. And again, these are kind of far out concepts, but as you dabble in the mystical tradition, they become a little bit more clear. All right, now to come in for my landing, I'm going to do a little teaching, and I think this would be most effective as a I'm going to say, meditation contemplation. So I invite you to close your eyes if that feels comfortable to you. Take a few deep breaths, center yourselves. Normally I would do a little bit longer of that. I don't want to rush, but I want this to be meaningful for everybody. Adon Olam Asher Malach B'Terem Kol Yetzir Nivra. Adon Olam Asher Malach B'Terem Kol Yetzir Nivra. And it's Peshat, it's simple translation. Master of the world who ruled before everything was created. Master of the world who ruled before everything was created. But Ibn Gabriel, poet and philosopher, was not thinking of just the Peshat, was not thinking simple, he was thinking deep. Adon Olam Asher Malach. Adon, from the biblical Hebrew, Adanim, joints, the matrix that holds a structure together. Olam, eternal in time, infinite in space, elusive, hidden. Adon Olam, the hidden matrix that holds reality together. Asher, not just a preposition, an adjective. Happy, joyous, blissful. Adon Olam Asher. If you grasp this matrix, you feel joy and bliss, your most sublime moments of peace radiate in every direction. Malach, from the word malchut, royalty, in Kabbalah, a synonym for Shekhinah, the one who dwells, the indwelling, dwelling everywhere, in everything. Adon Olam Asher Malach, the inward, elusive matrix of bliss. B'terem kol Yetzir Nivra, B'terem, before, in the before, the great before. Kol Yetzir, everything that has form. Nivra, was created. B'terem kol Yetzir Nivra, before anything with physical shape, anything with conceptual form or boundaries of any kind was created, before even a thought of creation, before a design or a plan arose, the indwelling, elusive matrix of bliss existed. But existed is a verb in the past tense form. And until beings with form were created, there was no past tense. There was no before, only an indwelling, elusive matrix of bliss. There was no infinity, because infinity means not finite. And without finite beings, who can measure infinity? Oi, infinity, a poor concept, product of the short reach of the human mind as it tries to grasp the elusive indwelling matrix of bliss. Infinity, a marvelous angel, God's first created concept, our very best tool to touch the matrix of bliss. Infinity, a measure, a hint, the footsteps of time marked out by the poet in his rhythmic words. Adon Olam Asher Malach, B'terem kol Yetzir Nivra. When I, Marc Kronisch, Moshe Simcha ben Yitzhak, the Peril Rivka, when I pray, I often ask, Holy One, help me, hold it all of my thoughts, all of my feelings, all of my fears, my failures, because you, Holy One, already holds them in your elusive matrix. Biado avki ruchi, into this cosmic hand I assign my spirit, trusting in its held in the matrix when it is time to sleep, whose bodily life is timed down to the minute by hormones, neurons, and nutrients, conforming to a circadian rhythm in full attention, surrendering my control. The matrix holds me until I wake up and beyond. V'im ruchi gaviati, with my soul expressed through this time-bound form. Adon Oli, my concept of the infinite God, keeps me company. V'lo ira, to see, to fear, though I never see the matrix itself, it holds me, I will not fear. Adon Olam Asher Malach, B'terem kol Yetzir Nivrach, Li'et Nasa B'chefsod kol, Azai Melech Shemo Nikra, Shemo Nikra. If you take a deep breath and open your eyes, I oopsed a little bit. I promised Reb Mark I'd leave a little more time for the closing and for questions and comments.
Ein Baya. Ein Baya, Mark. First and most importantly, my gratitude to you from all of us, but especially from me, for so many things, but for bringing Reb Zalman into the room tonight. Those of you recognize the melody, that is Shenandoah, which Reb Zalman loved and would break into at a moment's notice. Just a couple of things that you inspired in me that I want to raise up, Mark. First of all, to share with you and with everybody that Rabbi Laura Duhan Kaplan is a very dear friend of mine and Renee's. Laura Duhan Kaplan, who wrote what you just journeyed us through, right? Taught philosophy for many years at Duke.
Didn't I gave her credit? Yes.
Yes, you did. That's
Yeah.
how I knew. She taught at Duke and she won a National Teacher of the Year award. And she became an extraordinary rabbi and teacher of rabbinics and especially philosophy. And I studied with her a number of times. I could hear her voice as you were talking. And her, including her cadence and her mystical imagination taking flight and finding, as she is capable of, the words to bring us into her vision so that we can more closely be in relationship with our God. I want to expand upon your use of the pointing out Adonai and Adanim, and Adom Olam coming and Adanim coming using the same root, right? Aleph, Daled, Nun. So Reb Marsha, in her book, The Path of Blessings, points out, and I just want to massage a little of what you shared with us, Mark, that it's more than a joint, but it is one of those joints that can move. I forget what those are called. Like a ball bearing. Is that what it is?
Ball and
Yeah,
joint.
that's
Yes.
it.
Yeah.
So in that way,
All in the socket.
socket.
All in
in socket.
socket.
That's right.
Socket.
And what she is alluding to are the joints that held the Mishkan together in the building of the Mishkan in the desert. That there were these Adanim at the joint points that could bend. So take that even further, the idea that there's a joints holding the matrix together, but they are flexible and they bend and they move according to our journeys, according to the way that we interact with it. Mark, did you want to add something to that?
No, I'm wowing.
So Reb Marsha points that out in her book. Okay.
I have to say that when I heard Reb Laura teach that for the first time, it changed my whole view of Adom Olam, and I couldn't understand why we just said it at the end of a service. To me, it was just so opening. As it was so deep to me. It is so deep.
As is our intention for giving over these teachings tonight, so that it might spill over us all.
Yeah.
Two other things and bringing us in for a landing, and then we'll go out with a song, of course. Not being able to see God's face and live bookmark that, because this week's Torah portion, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. It's not in this week's Torah portion. What is in this week's Torah portion is a seeming contradiction to that, which is that the elders at the end of the Parsha, they see an image of God with the sapphires and the throne of God, right? Which brings me to my Chatima here. So hold that and take this. The words Adon Olam, when calculated with gematria, so what is a gematria again? Assigning a number to every letter, right? It's a numerical system, a numerological system. Adon Olam, the numbers 61 and 146, respectively, correspond to two other words that share the same gematria, Ein Sof, meaning the intimate, meaning without end. So what is suggested here in Adon Olam being both infinite and accessible is that the immanent and transcendent God are one and the same. Right? The immanent and the transcendent God are one and the same. Isn't that sweet?
Yeah.
All from those two words, Adon Olam. And that's how we find our way home when Shulamit sings that every Shabbat. So I don't want anybody to leave here thinking that Silverman wrote the melody, that Adon Olam Asher Malach. That's the melody that Mark and I alluded to, that we grew up with, and that we read from the Silverman Siddur, right? Morris Silverman, right? But that melody is an old German drinking song, accomplishing what Rav Kook would say is that you make the old new and the new holy. So we borrow from what we have in the quote unquote secular world, the idea being that the secular is that which is waiting to become holy, for us to fill it in with our holiness by lending our intentions to it. And so, a cappella again, because that's the way we sang it in shul. And I suspect it's the way it's still sung in shul in those shuls that still use that melody. I will share again the text with you if I can find it somewhere here. There it is. And we'll go out singing it. Thank you, Marc Kronisch.
Thank you, Mark.
This is the initial podcast, or whatever you want to call it, of the Marx brothers teaching Tefillah. Hopefully that'll be at once a month. Any questions or comments before we sing? Judy Rakusa.
What is it about this is like a musical question, not really a spiritual question, but.
Oh, all musical questions are spiritual questions.
Okay, well, what is it about the phrasing of Adon Olam that makes it so adaptable? I mean, to really any tune. I mean, I can think of probably 20 or 30 tunes I've heard it sung to over the years, and it fits every one of them. Like, what is it about the wording or the phrasing that makes it so adaptable to, to the traditional tune you gave it, and then the Adon Olam Asher Malach, that one, and then the Coke song, Adon Olam Asher Malach Terem Kol Yitzir Nivra, and Ripple, and all the rest of them. Like, why? How does it fit so nicely into all of those phrasings?
It's written in couplets, right? So it'll fit to anything that's in 4/4. Adon Olam Asher Malach B'Terem Kol Yitzir Nivra Li'et Nasa V'Chefso Kol Azai Melech Shemo Nikra. So anything in 4/4, Adon Olam Asher Malach B'Terem Kol Yitzir Nivra. That was especially for you, Judy, right? Is going to work. Now, if you start messing around with things in other time signatures, it might get a little dicey, but you probably can jerry-rig it to anything. But anything in 4/4, it works too because of that, because of the meter of the poetry. And if we had more time, you know what we would do, which is an Adon Olam sing down. And to sing any melody that we can fit it to and go around the room and doing that. Maybe we'll have to save that too. Oh, I think that your little friend there likes that idea. Because we do need to start reinstituting sometime Moshe sing-alongs, which we were doing for a whole summer. Remember, we did musical sing-alongs.
Can I just, why is it sung at the end of the service? Like, based on everything we talked about today, because the problem with it being at the end of the service is that as a child, it was like, oh, thank God the service is over. Like Adon Olam meant, oh, we get to go home. And it seems like based on what we talked about today, that's not really the right association.
Well, I thought you were going to say, oh, we get to eat.
Well, I was going to say that was before Rabbi Laura Kaplan came over with her teaching. I don't think we would have put it just at the end of the service.
So the fuller question is not just at the end of the service. It is one of the first things in the service on weekdays.
Yes.
Right? And it very well might have originally been written for the Shema B'mitah, for the night. Of course, it's incorporated in the nighttime prayers, which begin with a psalm and then Shema. And then the very last thing is Adon Olam. Why? Because that last line that Mark, alluded to, which we say, it's a v'yimruchi v'lo ira, v'etishan v'ya'ira, at the time we go to sleep and that we arise. So it's very possible that it was a statement of faith upon going to sleep. And the next morning, what do we say? Modeh Ani, which is the next show. And then followed by, look at a Siddur, if you have one at home, or go on Sefaria.com and pull up a Siddur. Look at the first prayers in the morning. You're going to find Modeh Ani, and then it's followed by Adon Olam. We don't do it. We don't usually do it in the mornings. That's usually part of the personal prayers. Any other questions? Otherwise, let's sing. Adon Olam Asher Malach B'Terem Kol Yitzir Nivra Li'et Nasa V'Cheftzo Kol Azai Melech Shemo Nikra V'Yacharei Kichlot HaKol Levado Yimloch Nora V'Hu Haya V'Hu Hoveh V'Hu Yeh B'Tifhara V'Hu Echad V'Ein Sheni Lahamshilo Lahachbira B'li Reshit B'li Tachlit V'lo Ha'oz V'Hamisra V'Hu Eli V'Chai Goali V'Tzor Chavli B'Yetzara V'Hu Nisi Umanos Li Menat Kosi B'Yom Ekra B'Yado Avkidruchi B'Yet Ishan V'Ya'ira V'Yimruchi Geviati Adonai Li. And as the Chazan in my shul would sing, V'lo